A long time ago, in a kingdom of courage and magic, noble knights gathered at a round table, vowing to protect justice and honor. But not all glory lasts forever. Amid betrayals, forbidden loves, and legendary battles, the greatest of quests emerged, the Holy Grail. Today you will witness the saga of Arthur and his knights. Adventure, mystery, magic. Grip your sword, get ready. The legend is about to begin. Chronistas say that before England had that name, the islands were a mosaic of small kingdoms surrounded by fog, iron, and fear. Knights swore allegiance to lords who barely controlled their own walls, and the people, tired of tributes and spears, dreamed of a single banner capable of ending the conflicts. In the midst of this tense landscape, a child would be born fated to alter the course of destiny. His name, Arthur, was still just a whisper in the future when dangerous intrigues and loves crossed paths with ancient magic. Uther Pendragon, an impetuous king, sought to unify Britain not only with treaties, but with steel. Where dialogue was lacking, there were trumpets of battle. It was during these campaigns that he saw Igraine, Duchess of Cornwall, wife of the Duke of Tintagel. Uther's gaze was set ablaze, hers, honored, recoiled. The king, devoured by a blinding passion, turned to the only man who dealt with the secrets of time, Merlin, the wizard with green eyes, long hair and a slow-spoken manner, who wandered the roads like a traveler between worlds. Merlin agreed to help him, but his voice brought the condition that would seal an entire life. If a son was born from the union, that child would be given to him, to be raised away from the intrigues and dangers of the court. Uther, torn between desire and ambition, swore. That night, a mist was born from the wizard's gesture and covered the castle like a veil. The king's features became those of the Duke of Tintagel, who was absent on the battlefield. Under the twilight and illusion, Igraine received who she believed to be her husband. Merlin's promise was not just a contract, it was the certainty that the boy would need to be protected from the pride of men. At dawn, knights arrived with news that tore through Cornwall. The true duke had fallen far away, pierced by a spear. Igraine's tears fell like winter rain. Between mourning and perplexity, she also felt the weight of an impossible question. Who, then, had been with her that night? The answer would be late, and in that interval, power changed hands. Uther took the castle, demanded marriage, and out of necessity, and to protect her daughter, the little Morgana, Igraine accepted the new lord of the castle. When the child was born, the wizard appeared without announcing his steps, as if summoned by the very thread of what he had foreseen. Merlin did not bring threats. He brought a memory. He reminded Uther of the promise, not as a demand, but as an inevitable direction. Igraine cried, Uther hesitated. However, both knew that the pact had been accepted even before the first cry sounded. The baby was named Arthur, and wrapped in simple cloths was given to Merlin. The wizard did not keep him. He took him to a just nobleman, Sir Ector, and asked him to raise him in secret. Arthur grew up alongside Kay, Sir Ector's biological son. If Kay's stride held the haughtiness of someone who would inherit swords and lands, Arthur's gestures carried a gentleness that inspired trust. He was not the strongest in the village, nor the fastest, but his determination was a firm rope. He never left a task half-finished, never shirked helping. Ector treated both as equals at the table. In practice, Arthur performed the duties of a diligent squire, preparing the mount, polishing breastplates, and adjusting armor and buckles before the sun rose. While he was growing up, the land was fracturing again. Uther fell ill and died, and his absence tore a void where many claimants to the throne rushed in. Barons and feudal kings raised their banners, and violence once again ravaged the counties. Villages were burned to deny shelter to the enemy, roads became dangerous in the simple light of day, and the church bells, more than calling to mass, sounded like a cry for help. In this chaos, Merlin's voice found the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thus a great meeting was convened in London. The announcement spoke of a miracle to be witnessed on Christmas Day. The news of the convocation spread curiosity and skepticism. Even so, when the bells rang and Mass was over, the cathedral was full and the surrounding streets overflowed with people. Some prayed for wonders, others just hoped for warmth and wine. The wonder, however, was waiting outside. In the churchyard, the murmur turned into a clamor. In the center of the square stood a gigantic stone, topped by a steel anvil, with a sword driven up to the hilt. In golden letters it read, "Who takes this sword from the stone, and the anvil is by right the King of all England." Few knew that Merlin himself had brought the blade from Avalon and sealed it there, so that only the true chosen one could move it. There were many attempts. Renowned lords, jousting champions, men whose strength could close gates alone approached with confidence. Some spat on their palms, others prayed softly, one or two tried thinly veiled tricks. Nothing. The blade did not move, even the thickness of a hair. There were those who laughed, saying it was a wizard's maneuver to entertain, and those who trembled, fearing that it was God's finger pointing to someone they did not yet know. Merlin, discreet, watched from a distance, and his patience was like a stone in the river. The current passed, he remained. Days passed, and the city was bustling. Tournaments were arranged to stir up spirits and prove merits. Sir Ector came with Kay to compete, and Arthur, as always, took care of what was needed. At dawn, one of those mornings, with the trumpets already summoning the knights to the arena, Kay realized he had left his sword at home. Irritation rose to his face, urgency to his lips. "Arthur!" he shouted. "My sword! Bring it! Quick!" The boy took off running, crossed alleys, dodged vendors, reached the door. It was locked. He knocked, called, nothing. Time was pressing. Arthur looked around out of breath and saw the church tower outlined against the pale sky. He remembered the sword in the stone. He did not think of crowns. He thought of fulfilling a task. He went to the churchyard, where the crowd had not yet gathered at that hour. The stone was there, the anvil, the blade that slept. He approached with respect, as if asking for permission, and placed his hand on the cold hilt. He did not pull with fury. He just took a breath and tried. The sword came out with docility, as if Arthur was, in fact, returning it to the movement it was destined for. There were no explosions of light. There was a thick silence, the kind that seems to hear something we do not. Arthur, astonished and relieved, ran back to the field and handed the weapon to Kay. "Where did you get that?" Kay asked, his eyes wide. "At the church," Arthur answered simply. "From the stone." Kay's face changed. He knew that blade that no champion had been able to move. For a moment, pride fought with conscience. Sir Ector approached, sensing the tension. "Son," he said to his firstborn, "what's wrong?" Kay opened his mouth, hesitated, closed it. He looked away to Arthur, who was looking at him without calculation, only with sincerity. "Father," he began, "I wish it had been me, but it was Arthur who pulled it out." Sir Ector was not offended. He knelt, not before the sword, but before what it revealed. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice choked, "if it is true, we will see again with all eyes." They walked to the church. A murmur spread when they saw the young man with the sword. The Archbishop appeared, summoned by messages that run faster than footsteps, and asked for a test in front of everyone. Arthur, confused, just nodded. He drove the blade back into the anvil and stepped back. There were those who laughed, already anticipating the boy's humiliation. At the Archbishop's signal, Arthur advanced, held the hilt, and without effort removed the sword as if picking a flower from the water. Some immediately knelt. Others shouted that it was a trick. They demanded a repetition, Arthur repeated. They demanded more witnesses, Arthur repeated again. With each identical gesture, the resistance wilted like a candle in the wind. Finally, even the skeptics crossed gazes with the evidence. There was the chosen one. The archbishop spoke of anointing and duties, but it was the people who first shouted Arthur's name as king, because the people recognize when hope finds a body to inhabit. The coronation, however, did not sweep away the map of knives. Some lords accepted, others swallowed the bitterness with a practiced smile and returned to their halls. Among the displeased was Sir Uriens, a tournament champion, who saw the young king's youth as an insult to the blood he considered older and more worthy. Merlin watched Uriens' departure, his jaw clenched, the men around him like compact shadows. The wizard knew the outline of the dangers. The sword had pointed to a king. Now the kingdom would have to learn what it meant to serve him. Arthur, in turn, did not feel made of bronze. When the crowd dispersed and the weight of the crown truly rested on his head, he sought out Merlin. "Why me?" he asked in a whisper he did not want others to hear. "Am I not Ector's son only by upbringing? Was I not the one who ran after weapons and buckles? How can I be king?" "Because you ran," the wizard replied, seeing beyond the boy. "Because you did not desire the sword, but the responsibility. The kingdom needs someone who pulls out what is stuck, not out of vanity, but out of necessity." The answer did not remove his fear, but it gave Arthur an axis. He remembered the face of Igraine, whom he had never known as a mother, Sir Ector's embrace, Kay's laughter in childhood, the smell of leather and oil in the stable. A king is not born out of nothing. He is born from the sum of hands that shaped him, and that sum now pushed him forward. That night, before the torches were extinguished, Arthur returned to the empty churchyard. He weighed the sword in his hands. Excalibur seemed lighter than any metal, and at the same time more serious than any decision. The wind passed and moved the strands of his hair. He raised his eyes to the tower and, without witnesses, silently promised that his strength would be for uniting and protecting. In the distance, Merlin smiled, as if listening to a vow that the world needed to hear. That is how the journey began. Not with endless trumpets, but with a gesture of obedience to what destiny, justice, and courage demanded. And while some knights mounted their horses, ruminating on the idea of resistance, London fell asleep more peacefully than the day before. The sword was in hands that did not seek it for glory, and this, of all omens, was the best of all. The fight between Arthur and Lancelot seemed more like a storm of iron and fury than a simple duel. The king, already exhausted, pressed a hand against his chest, trying to staunch the blood gushing from a deep cut. His eyes shone with determination, but his body showed the limits of one who carried so much weight in battles. On the other side, Lancelot advanced with his sword held high, striking with the precision and speed of one born for combat. Each clash of their blades resonated like thunder, echoing through the stones around the lake. Even with his courage, Arthur felt his strength falter. In a reckless move, the king lost his balance, stumbled, and fell heavily against the stones of the bank. The blow to his head left him stunned, and for a moment, silence reigned. Lancelot, breathless, approached cautiously, believing his king was no longer in a state to react. A cry of emotion escaped him when he realized Arthur remained motionless. It was in this brief lapse of care that destiny changed. The king, gathering what little energy he had left, invoked the magic of Excalibur and delivered a precise blow. The blade shone like lightning before hitting Lancelot's shoulder, who fell to the ground, motionless. Blood ran thick and dark over the white of the knight's armor. Arthur, however, had no time to celebrate his victory. Before his eyes, Excalibur, the sacred sword that symbolized his royalty, had broken in two. He held the pieces in his hands and roared with anger and pain. "Damn it! What madness of mine! I risked everything in a useless dispute just to prove my courage. And what did I get? The destruction of the sword that made me king. What kind of sovereign am I now? It was then that a familiar voice emerged, deep and serene, cutting through the air like an ancient wind. You are a rare king, Arthur. Few men see their own flaws. Fewer still are able to admit them, and very few are those who truly regret. Merlin was there, appearing as always in the moments when he was most needed. His staff seemed to pulsate with the energy of the earth and sky. Approaching the king, he continued, "But I cannot deny that you used Excalibur to satisfy your vanity when its true mission is to unite and protect. The sword does not exist for the glory of one man, but to serve all." Arthur took a deep breath, recognizing the truth in those words. "You are right, old friend. My anger and pride blinded me. I broke what should be sacred." Merlin raised his finger towards the lake and with a sharp voice ordered, "Cast the fragments into the waters. Throw away Excalibur." Arthur hesitated, still in disbelief. "Perhaps it can still be fixed." "Do not question, Arthur. Do as I say," the wizard interrupted firmly. With regret, the king obeyed. The two pieces of the sacred blade sank slowly, swallowed by the dark waters. Arthur, disappointed, opened his mouth to protest, but Merlin raised his hand for silence and pointed to the lake again. It was then that something extraordinary happened. A feminine hand, pale as the moon and adorned with gold bracelets, rose from the depths. In her possession was a whole shining sword, which glittered as if it carried the very fire of the stars. Arthur, marveling, waded into the waters and received the sword and scabbard from the hands of the Lady of the Lake. The woman, shrouded in an aura of mystery, looked into the king's eyes and said in a sweet but firm voice, "Excalibur is restored. But remember, you now owe me a gift." The king, overwhelmed with gratitude, replied without hesitation, "Ask for whatever you wish, and I will grant it." The lady smiled enigmatically. "When the time comes, I will come to collect what is due to me." Then she disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples on the water. Arthur, ecstatic, raised the sword high. "Look, Merlin, it has returned." "Yes," the wizard said with a serious expression. "But do not forget, the greatest treasure is not the sword, but the scabbard. As long as you have it, no wound will bleed upon you." Arthur promised to use it wisely, but his mind had already turned to Lancelot, who had fallen. Despite the duel, the king did not wish for the death of such a valiant man. He ordered Merlin to heal him. Reluctantly, the wizard agreed and, transmitting invisible energies with his hands, closed the knight's wounds. Years passed and peace in Camelot seemed solid. However, one afternoon during a meeting of the Round Table, a young woman appeared in tears. She carried at her waist a mysterious sword, fastened to its scabbard by a spell. Only a worthy knight could free it. Several tried and failed, until Balin, eager to prove his worth, managed to pull it out with ease. But the maiden warned him, "This sword will be your ruin. It will bring you shame, the death of your best friend, and your own destruction." Balin, seized by arrogance, ignored the warning. He became known as the Knight with the Two Swords, but his glory would be brief. When he once again came across the Lady of the Lake, who had come to collect the gift promised by Arthur, Balin could not contain his fury and beheaded her in the throne room. Arthur, horrified, banished him from Camelot. Wandering the world, Balin mistakenly killed his own brother Balin and, overcome by despair, fulfilled the prophecy by plunging the sword into his own heart. Meanwhile, Lancelot became the most admired knight of the Round Table. Arthur proclaimed him the first knight of Camelot, and his prowess in tournaments and battles was praised by all. But there was a secret fire that burned in his heart, his passion for Queen Guinevere. The queen, likewise, could not hide her admiration and desire for the Knight of the Lake. The two exchanged silent glances, harboring a forbidden love. To escape temptation, Lancelot constantly embarked on adventures, channeling his energy into heroic deeds. On one of these journeys, he freed Princess Elaine from a curse cast by the fairy Morgana, Arthur's envious half-sister. He faced a winged dragon, defeating it with courage and skill, and, under the charms of the night and treacherous spells, was deceived into believing that Elaine was Guinevere. From this union, Galahad was born, although Lancelot would only discover this years later. As rumors of the secret romance grew, tensions increased in Camelot. Sir Gawain, loyal but suspicious, accused Lancelot and the Queen of treason. Arthur, pained but just, declared that only a duel could decide the truth. Lancelot and Gawain faced each other in fierce combat, their swords crossing under the anxious gaze of the court. The duel ended without a death, but left deep wounds in the knight's loyalty. It was in this climate of distrust that a divine sign appeared. A block of marble floated in the river with the sword that once belonged to the Lady of the Lake embedded in it. Only a pure heart could remove it. Everyone looked at the young Galahad, recently knighted, who crossed the bridge raised by Merlin and wielded the blade with ease. The revelation came next. Galahad was the son of Lancelot and Elaine. His arrival completed the seats of the Round Table, and everyone realized that a new chapter was opening in the destiny of Camelot. During the banquet that followed, an intense light filled the hall. The Holy Grail appeared before everyone, wrapped in silk, radiating an indescribable peace. For a few moments, the knights felt as if they had lived the most perfect meal of their lives. But in the blink of an eye, the chalice disappeared, leaving only emptiness and the burning desire to find it. Merlin explained its sacred nature, recalling the Last Supper and the blood of Christ collected by Joseph of Arimathea. Gawain was the first to proclaim the quest for the Grail, and soon the entire hall echoed with voices swearing to find the divine chalice. Arthur, though proud of his knights, felt in his heart that this quest would separate them and forever change the destiny of Camelot. The collective vision of the Grail had always weighed heavily on Arthur's mind. He knew that this quest would be the most dangerous of all, capable of dissolving the Round Table, as many knights would not return alive. The irony was that such a disintegration would happen precisely when the table had reached its peak, with 150 knights gathered for the first time in harmony. Arthur felt that destiny seemed to be toying with him. A few days before the departure, Merlin approached the king. His eyes, deep as ancient lakes, conveyed both sadness and wisdom. "Arthur," the wizard said, "the end of the Round Table is a divine punishment. Discord and ambition have corroded the hearts of many. Only Galahad has the purity needed to find the Grail, for he was born for this purpose." Arthur squeezed his old friend's hand. "And you, Merlin?" he asked. "My tasks now are beyond Avalon, in the hidden lands that call me," the wizard replied, wrapped in mists. And so, Merlin departed, leaving the king with the certainty that the separation of the table was inevitable. The next morning, the central square of Camelot was buzzing with excitement. 150 knights marched in parade, greeted by the sad looks of the population. Queen Guinevere, especially, could not hide her fear for the fate of Lancelot, her secret love. Before the departure, Merlin suggested that the duel between Lancelot and Gawain be postponed until the return of the quest. The decision was accepted. If the Grail was found, harmony would prevail, and duels would become unnecessary. The knights dispersed, traveling to all corners of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Amidst dark forests, scorching deserts, and icy mountains, they sought any clue to the Grail. They spoke with hermits, sorcerers, alchemists, and philosophers, explored ancient libraries, and faced traps set by old enemies. Many perished, victims of the Scandinavian cold or the sands of the Sahara. Some gave up, ashamed, while others fell in frivolous combat, turning into mercenaries. Sir Galahad, the purest of all, reached an abandoned monastery. There he found dead knights, arranged in a circle around a white shield with a red cross. As he approached, he heard a familiar voice. "Do not touch this shield, Galahad. Only the purest will survive this trial." It was Sir Gawain. Galahad, aware of his mission, lifted the shield with firm hands and proceeded. With an enchanted sword and shield in hand, he crossed the English Channel towards Europe. Months later, Lancelot and Percival were looking for clues in the Black Forest of Germany, in search of an old hermit who knew the legends of the royal blood. When they came across Galahad, they understood that each knight should face his spiritual challenges alone. Lancelot, even after finding the Grail in an abandoned chapel, heard that he was not worthy because he loved a married woman. Sir Galahad, Percival and Sir Bors decided to join forces and travel together to the east. In Jerusalem, Galahad dreamed that the Grail was in England. They returned, and he finally touched the sacred chalice, receiving orders to take it to Sarras. There, they performed miracles, healing the sick, until the city's king imprisoned them. When the sovereign was mortally wounded, he asked Galahad to heal him with the Grail. Upon fulfilling the request, Galahad received the throne of Sarras, which he ruled with justice, alongside Percival and Bors, keeping the Holy Grail protected. Months passed, and Sir Bors returned to Camelot to tell Arthur about the conclusion of Galahad's mission. The Round Table, however, could no longer reunite as before. Lancelot withdrew, and Arthur faced loneliness with Guinevere in separate rooms. It was in this setting that Morgana, Arthur's half-sister, cast her spell, seducing the king and giving birth to Mordred, Arthur's son, and her plan of destruction. Mordred grew up obsessed with power. With Morgana, he forged letters and proclaimed himself king in Arthur's absence. He set traps to win over Guinevere, who was saved by Lancelot. Sir Gaheris and Sir Gareth died in this confrontation, and Gawain swore revenge, persuading Arthur to wage war against former allies. The conflict only ceased due to the Pope's intervention, who promoted a peace treaty between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. However, Gawain refused to forgive his former friend. When Mordred finally rose as the new king, he set ambushes to destroy Arthur's army. The battles were bloody and relentless, with wounded knights, starving armies, and fields painted red. Only Bedivere and Lucan survived the last battle, and Arthur, gravely wounded, faced Mordred in an epic fight. The evil son was killed, but Arthur also received fatal blows. Before he died, Arthur ordered Bedivere to return Excalibur to the Enchanted Lake. After 2 failed attempts, Bedivere finally fulfilled the mission, and the sword disappeared into the depths, guided by a feminine hand. Arthur then was taken on an enchanted barge to Avalon, leaving Bedivere with the responsibility of continuing the story of the Round Table. Guinevere retired to a convent, dedicating herself to prayers. Lancelot, in penance and fasting, also died in solitude. The legend says that Arthur still lives in Avalon, waiting for the day to return to England and restore his hegemony, while the myth of King Arthur remains alive in the memory of the people. The knight's fate was sealed, the Grail found, the Round Table dissolved, but the legend of Camelot never dies. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and redemption echo through the centuries, and even in the darkest times, hope and honor continue to shine. If you enjoyed this epic journey, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, some legends never fade, they just wait to be remembered.